Playoff experience is considered valuable to most NFL general managers. So who could Adam Peters be targeting from this year's wildcard weekend? That and more on today's episode of Locked On Commanders.
Your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
And welcome into this episode of Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast covering the Washington Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day every day. And don't forget that you can subscribe for free on YouTube or wherever you're listening to this podcast. And you can continue this conversation with me by becoming a Locked On Commanders insider. Go to joinsubtext.com/Locked On Commanders. And from there, you'll get text messages directly from me. Send them directly to me. We got questions, answers, inside information, news, analysis, exclusive content, all kinds of one-on-one conversations. Just go to joinsubtext.com/Locked On Commanders today to sign up. We've had a very strong influx of new insiders since the offseason began, so I want to welcome all of you. Thank you for taking the trip with me. I hope you enjoyed and certainly enjoy having you on board. I'm David Harrison, credentialed member of the media covering the Washington Commanders for Washington for CommanderCountry.com, part of Sports Illustrated's FanNation. I'm here with you every Monday through Friday, along with our everydayers. As always, appreciate your continued support for the show. Today's episode brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create your account, use the code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. On today's episode, we're talking about two players from each of the Monday Night Football games happening today to wrap up the wildcard weekend that Adam Peters, new Washington Commanders general manager, could target this offseason. But first, we've got one from each of the teams that's already played. This is our first real full-on free agent episode here of Locked On Commanders. More free agent episodes will be coming down the pike. I'll be ranking the free agents. We'll be looking at scheme fits once we know what the scheme should look like and all those kinds of things. So a lot of exciting things coming on the horizon as far as personnel is concerned. But playoff matchups always present an interesting opportunity to look at players that are coming from teams that obviously have at least a short track record of success. When you look at teams like the Houston Texans, not known as one of the more dominant teams of their time, but certainly a successful season. And then they come in and they handle business at home, defeating the Cleveland Browns 45-14 to kick off the wild card festivities. Joe Flacco, Cleveland Browns quarterback, his Grandpa Joe magic is over. C.J. Stroud, D'Amico Ryans, the quarterback and head coach of the Houston Texans, their magic is going to continue into the divisional round next weekend. And when you look at the Houston Texans list of potential free agents, and these are guys who have expiring contracts who may or may not be re-signed or may not decide to come back to their current franchise. I'm looking at tight end Dalton Schultz. So former Dallas Cowboys tight end. This is a guy that we talked about last offseason. Certainly liked the tight end room of Logan Thomas, John Bates, Cole Turner. Had more excitement about Cole Turner, I think, than what actually came to fruition, unfortunately. And I know that I'm not alone in being a little disappointed in how much we did or didn't see Cole Turner. But Dalton Schultz is a guy, he's been around a little bit. He's always been kind of a solid tight end option for his quarterback, going back to his days with the Dallas Cowboys. And while the Texans beat the proverbial brakes off of the Cleveland Browns, Dalton Schultz had one catch in the game with worth 37 yards. Yeah, but that 37 yards was a 37-yard touchdown. So you may not have seen a lot of him, but certainly added value to that team. He's on a one-year deal in Houston for this season and getting his first playoff game with them, obviously, this go around. And, coming from the Dallas Cowboys, who are now going home, he's playing with Houston, who's going on to the divisional round. Certainly happy with that decision. In the regular season, Schultz collected 59 receptions, 635 yards, 5 touchdowns. He is projected to earn around $11 million per year on his next contract, according to Spot Track. So that's going to be an interesting number to try to talk about. But certainly a guy, when you look at the tight end room now with the 2023 results on, you can't be confident that you have a true call him a number one tight end or a truly effective tight end for whoever your quarterback is moving into the future. And most people seem to be in agreement that it's going to be a young quarterback one way or another. So you certainly want to have reliable tight end play in that room. Looking at the Cleveland Browns side of that first wild card matchup, I'm looking at a veteran here. I'm looking at Za'Darius Smith, edge rusher. And Za'Darius Smith is a guy that you might remember from the preseason because we were all worried about how much damage he was going to do against young Sam Howell and how well or unwell the Washington Commanders offensive line was going to be able to hold up against him and his buddies. Well, while the Texans ride into the divisional round of the playoffs, Cleveland's ride unfortunately comes to an end, and they'll come back next year hoping that Deshaun Watson is healthy and able to play up to the level that they thought he was going to when they paid him all that money. But the Commanders are looking to rebuild their roster. And, when we talk rebuild, we always look at younger guys. We look at draft capital, players that are, under 28, 29 years old, things like that. But a few well-placed veterans can really help kind of accelerate that process. It gives you a little bit of a stopgap. We bring in this veteran here. We don't need to invest draft capital necessarily at the top end of this position group for a year or two. You kind of roll the dice on hoping that they stay healthy. And obviously health is always a big issue. And the bottom line is you can't secure top depth at every position group. So you just have to hope that when the injury bug bites, it bites you in a place where you're deep, not shallow. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But with a guy like Za'Darius Smith, you're talking about a guy who's been around. He's been on multiple teams. He's seen multiple locker rooms, multiple leadership styles, and he's produced really in every single one of them. He's going to be older, obviously, but brings that proven ability to produce and leadership that comes with that experience in the locker room. Additionally, if the Baltimore Ravens defense coordinator Mike Macdonald becomes the new head coach of the Washington Commanders, which he's still at the top of my preferred list, Ben Johnson's certainly making himself more than enough of a case. Wouldn't be upset with either of those guys. But if it's Mike Macdonald that gets the job, or if it's Ben Johnson that gets the job, and they bring in an odd front defense, Smith has familiarity with that type of a defensive scheme. I think he's better off as a stand-up outside linebacker versus a hand-in-the-ground defensive end. And Mike Macdonald and Za'Darius Smith were actually together for a time with the Baltimore Ravens. So this is a guy that they would both know the culture that they're coming from, the culture that they're trying to instill here in Washington, and potentially be able to make that impact again. 2024, maybe 2025. He's not going to be here long. You are going to eventually replace him, kind of have that plan, kind of wanting to have a plan at least in place from the time you bring him in. But at least for that 1 or 2 years you have him, he would kind of help you spread out the youth, spread out the draft picks to other positions, and not have to spend so much on that position early on. So 3 Pro Bowls in the last 5 years for Za'Darius. Kind of bouncing around a little bit. He did suffer an injury while he was with the Green Bay Packers that kind of ended his time there. Only played 59% of defensive snaps this season for the Cleveland Browns. So I really think this is a guy who's going to be looking to make a move to get somewhere where he can get a little bit more playing time as well. Whereas Dalton Schultz, look, I mean, I wouldn't blame Dalton if he wants to come back to the Houston Texans and certainly make a deal to come there. So I don't know how likely it is that Dalton Schultz will actually be looking for a new home this offseason. But Za'Darius Smith, I think, is a guy that will be looking for a new home. So potentially a veteran that could fit there with what Adam Peters is trying to do with the Washington Commanders. Again, this is all preliminary because we don't know schemes. We don't know mentalities. So we got to wait for that. But just as you're watching these games, just remember that there are guys on these rosters that could potentially become available and come to Washington because, the days of Washington being a pariah, being a destination that people avoid, I think those days are over, and some of those relationships will be able to kind of fade into past, hopefully. So there are 3 more games that have already been played, 2 more games that have to be played. I've got 1 free agent from each side of every single one of those matchups coming up for you next year on today's episode of Locked On Commanders. This episode is brought to you by Game Time, and at Game Time, or Game Time thinks anyway, that you shouldn't have to worry about buying tickets when you want to go to a big event. Game Time is the fastest and the easiest way to buy tickets for all your sports, music, comedy, and theater near you, and they've got killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. Game Time is the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase. You can see the view from your seat before you buy it, so you know exactly what you're getting yourself into and exactly what to expect when you arrive to the venue. That all-in pricing shows your total up front, so you know what kind of great deal you're getting before you even hit the checkout. Game Time has deals on tickets right up to the start of the event, and even an hour after it starts in some situations. It is the place for you to find those last-minute seats. And the Game Time guarantee means you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets for the same event, same row, same section, for less money, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the promo code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Today's episode is also brought to you by Jace Medical, who presents to you their Jace case, an opportunity for you to be as prepared as possible during one of the worst flu seasons in recent memory. I know we come to sports to escape from the crazy realities of real life, but we do also need to make sure that our real life is taken care of. And the best way to take care of your real life is to be prepared for as many things as you can. And you don't want to run into supply shortages, pharmacy shortages, whether that means you can't leave the house or get to where you need to go to get to whatever it is that you need to get. The Jace case packs 5 different antibiotics to treat a long list of bacterial illnesses, including UTIs, respiratory infections, sinusitis, skin infections, among others. And this stuff can happen to anybody. Visit jacemedical.com and complete your physician encounter. It will be reviewed by a board-certified physician, and your medications will be dispensed by a licensed pharmacy at a fraction of the regular cost. It's never been more important to be prepared than it is today. Go to jacemedical.com. Use the offer code LOCKEDON to get $20 off your order. Again, jacemedical.com. Continuing on with today's episode of Locked On Commanders. Thanks for making Locked On Commanders your first listener, your first view today and every day. Everydayers, come back tomorrow. We'll have another episode. Hopefully a little bit of news on the coaching front, maybe some more interviews, and we'll do a deeper dive, a restacking of our coaching candidates, so to speak, because there have been some new names added since the last time that we did that here on the program. Locked On has also launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Continuing our wild card round of free agency, take look at some guys who are coming up on their contracts here at the end of the regular season. We took a look at 2 players already from the Houston Texans Cleveland Browns contest. Now we're going to flip over to the other AFC wildcard contest this weekend that's already been played, the Chiefs and the Miami Dolphins. The Kansas City Chiefs winning that game 26-7. And I think the cold weather absolutely impacts the Miami Dolphins. If you checked out the Locked On NFL episode on Friday, which I host with my usual co-host, Tony Wiggins. Unfortunately, he was sick. So we had Louis DiBiase of Locked On Eagles come through in a pinch and co-host with me. But we talked about this game. We talked about all these games, but specifically this Kansas City Chiefs Miami Dolphins game. Talked about the weather and the impact that it could have on such a high-flying offense like the one that Miami likes to field. Plus, when you go through kind of the Miami Dolphins history this season, when you take one of these weapons off the field for Tua Tagovailoa and for Coach Mike McDaniel's offense, it really impacts things. You know what I mean? It's not like one of these offenses that can just kind of take, losing one player and still be a fairly relatively, dangerous offense. Really, when you take one weapon off that Dolphins team this season, it really changes who they are as a team. So losing Jalen Waddle, while obviously Tyreek Hill is the better, more productive receiver of the two, losing Jalen Waddle was not a small deal. And that, coupled with the icy conditions, the cold conditions, I think just completely took away the Miami Dolphins' opportunities to win this game. So the Kansas City Chiefs progress. The Miami Dolphins go home, but the Kansas City Chiefs do have some expiring contracts on their roster at the end of the season. And one of them is someone that I know fairly well, safety Mike Edwards. In spectacularly frigid conditions, Mike Edwards was able to come up with a big play. He was on the field for 61 of his team's defensive snaps on Saturday and came away with 2 tackles and a very big interception. That interception off of Dolphins quarterback Tua Tagovailoa came with just over 3 minutes left in the first quarter on the Chiefs side of the field in a 1-score game. And so when you look at the conditions, you look at what the Dolphins were going through, it's kind of one of those games where they almost had to play perfect in order to pull off the upset. So that interception, a really big thing in the course of this game. And ultimately, you look at a first quarter interception in a game that ends 26-7, say how big of a deal could that have been? But if you think about it, if the Miami Dolphins get points on the board there, they've got a little bit of momentum. They get a little bit of belief in themselves, and perhaps that game turns out differently. I'm not saying the Dolphins win without that interception necessarily, but certainly could change the dynamic of the game at least a little bit. It's exactly the kind of ability to make impact plays that I saw from Mike Edwards when he was with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. It's what made him a fan favorite of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Unfortunately, it also led him to basically pricing himself out when they were facing some salary cap struggles after their Super Bowl runs and all those things. So the Commanders aren't going to have that issue. They're going to be able to pay Mike Edwards, and I'm not saying Mike Edwards is getting top safety money. I'm not saying he's going to break the bank or anything like that, but they certainly don't have any cap issues that are going to prevent them from potentially signing him if they do go after him. And he's a ball hawking type of safety who also doesn't mind getting dirty in the box. Just kind of an all-around playmaker, really, that is a good dude to have on your defense if you can get him. And I know that he would be more than happy to take a multi-year deal to kind of stick in one place for a little bit after bouncing from Tampa to Kansas City if he does not return to the Kansas City Chiefs. On the Miami Dolphins side of things, I'm looking at defensive lineman Christian Wilkins. And this one, I'm going to be honest, this one kind of goes into the pipe dream category of things. I actually reached out to Kyle Krabs, Locked on Dolphins, and asked him if, pipe dream category was kind of realistic for Christian Williams. And he agreed that, this is probably not a guy who's actually going to hit the open market. But while we have the opportunity to look at the Miami Dolphins free agency class and look at who might be coming up, I couldn't help but go after Christian Wilkins in this conversation. If Washington can lure him away like they lured top, executive target Adam Peters away from the 49ers, then it would be just another home run on top of home runs. And home is what Wilkins refers to the Miami Dolphins as. So obviously he wants to stay. But the Miami Dolphins have some troubles in their cap situation. They've got to do some salary cap gymnastics. We've seen teams do it year after year and all that stuff. Tua Tagovailoa may want a new deal to prevent him from playing on his fifth-year option next year, things like that. So security or a lack of security could cause some problems here. And if Wilkins doesn't feel the love from the Miami Dolphins this offseason, the Commanders have the resources to help him fall in love with the DMV. I would almost expect them, though, to franchise tag him and try to work on a deal into the new league year, though. That's how important Christian Wilkins has been for the Miami Dolphins. Only had 3 tackles on Saturday, so he might not have seemed as impactful if that's the only game you've really watched him in. But trust me, Christian Wilkins is one of the best out there doing it right now. Cowboys 32, Packers 48. I know a lot of you were watching that game. A lot of you very happy with the way it turned out. That score, 48-32, really not indicative of just how much of a lopsided game that was for the Green Bay Packers. And what made me really excited is when I saw Darnell Savage, the Packers safety, returning an interception for a touchdown, because I already had him on my list as the Green Bay Packers free agent to know from this team. Look, he missed time in 2023 due to some calf injuries. And we know here with the Washington Commanders, calf injuries can be annoying and nagging. But he had that pick 6 and 4 tackles against the Dallas Cowboys in a big time wild card win. It was 27-0, after that pick 6. And really, that was kind of the moment you felt like the Dallas Cowboys were dead in the water at that time. Speaking of those Dallas Cowboys, their free agent, this one's a little bit of a hot take. Running back Tony Pollard. Look, teams don't like to pay running backs right now. We've seen that. They let Ezekiel Elliott walk, even though they wanted to be a more run-focused team. And, while Tony has certainly flashed and had his moments and even had his games where he's been a very impactful player, I don't think that he's turned into the running back that they thought they were going to get when they went ahead and let Ezekiel Elliott walk and then did not use prime draft capital on adding another running back. So I get the feeling, with the Dallas Cowboys, they could just be shifting, directions altogether. They kind of have to stick with Dak Prescott because of that contract, but everywhere else, I think they might just be shifting directions. And if that happens, then Tony Pollard could be looking for a new home. And if you don't bring Antonio Gibson back to Washington, you go from one Memphis Tiger to another Memphis Tiger. Tony Pollard, 15 carries, 56 yards, 7 catches, 29 yards, and a rushing touchdown. I don't think he would look down at the opportunity to potentially get back at his old team if they don't go ahead and do what it takes to bring him back. So we got one more game that's already been played, and we got 2 games that still have to be played on Monday night. Free agents from all 6 of those teams coming up on this episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL regular season is all wrapped up, but there's still time for you to get in on the action this postseason with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers, you get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed whenever you place a $5 bet. That's $150 in bonus bets, whether you win or lose. On Monday, the Pittsburgh Steelers are 10-point underdogs on the road against the Buffalo Bills because they're finally going to play their game. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers are 2.5-point underdogs at home against the Philadelphia Eagles, despite receiver A.J. Brown missing the game and quarterback Jalen Hurts playing just a week after dislocating the middle finger on his throwing hand. Bet $5 and you will get $150 in bonus bets. They also have live same-game parlays. There's a new Explore tab to find new bets every day. Make your own parlay in the Parlay Hub, which is an amazingly popular way to play, and even more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and win your first bet, no matter what. FanDuel, official partner of the National Football League. Wrapping up things here on Locked On Commanders, our wild card weekend look at potential free agents coming up this offseason. that the Washington Commanders could target. Looking now at the Detroit Lions, Los Angeles Rams games, the Lions come out with a 24-23 win in the Goff Stafford Bowl. And from the Lions side of things, Craig Reynolds, their running back, was actually the guy that I was looking at. Look, his first 3 seasons in the NFL came in Washington starting in 2019. So he could be a guy that you look to return to the franchise. Not a totally dynamic player in a way that's completely separate from Brian Robinson. You like a guy like Chris Rodriguez, but with David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs in Detroit, Reynolds just simply is not going to get much burn there. We love Chris Rodriguez personally, but a new coaching staff is likely going to want to bring in competition. They're not just going to hand Chris Rodriguez that second running back job. So I'd expect competition brought in. Certainly, if Reynolds goes looking for another opportunity to potentially climb up a depth chart, this is one that he could potentially climb up in. Wouldn't hate a backfield, honestly, that consists of Brian Robinson Jr., Tony Pollard, Chris Rodriguez Jr., and Craig Reynolds. Like, that's a really good backfield to me. I don't know if you keep 4 running backs, but, look, you let those guys battle it out. You find your top 2 or 3 and you roll with it, as long as the offense coordinator is actually going to use running backs in 2024. Reynolds had 7 snaps on offense on Sunday, 10 on special teams. So if you didn't notice him, it's not really a big surprise, but it's actually just one more reason why he might go looking for employment elsewhere this offseason. Los Angeles Rams, I was looking at cornerback Ahkello Witherspoon. He's bounced around a bit. Started with San Francisco, went to Pittsburgh, ended up with the Rams, tied with a career high of 3 interceptions this regular season, had a 73.7 coverage grade this season, mostly in zone, not really great in man coverage. So scheme is obviously going to be a big determining factor on whether or not he's a real fit. 55 snaps in the wild card loss, had 2 tackles in the losing effort for the Los Angeles Rams. So those are the games that have been played, but there are 2 games that still have to be played here on Monday as wildcard weekend wraps up. Buffalo Bills hosting the Pittsburgh Steelers, Tampa Bay Buccaneers hosting the Philadelphia Eagles. And for the Pittsburgh Steelers side of things, I'm looking at cornerback Levi Wallace. There's not a lot of options on the Steelers roster, to be quite honest with you, but Levi Wallace should get some matchups against Stephon Diggs. So it's a really good opportunity to watch a guy who's going up against one of the best receivers in the NFL, even if his production has been down, even if the attitude hasn't been great, still one of the better receivers in the NFL. So getting a look at Levi Wallace against him, certainly an opportunity that you don't want to pass up. Another guy that plays mostly in zone, plays well mostly in zone especially. So again, another guy that's scheme specific. If the Commanders switch to a defense that's heavy in man, then obviously Ahkello Witherspoon, Levi Wallace probably going to come off that list. Buffalo Bills. I'm looking at another return guy, right? Tim Settle, defensive lineman. I know a lot of Commanders fans were not, happy to see him leave in the first place. His contract with Buffalo is coming up at the end of the season. So defensive line depth issues were an issue for the Commanders this season. So bringing back a guy like Settle to compete, to be a part of that rotation could be a really good move. If Washington moves to an odd front, I could actually see Tim Settle moving from a defensive tackle to a defensive end role in, say, a 3-4 type of alignment, which I think he could be really good at. For the Philadelphia Eagles, I'm looking at Quez Watkins, wide receiver, who at one point in time was really looked at as an up-and-comer, looked at as a guy that was probably going to have a really steady role with Philadelphia Eagles offense. They trade for A.J. Brown. He starts dropping some passes here and there, and suddenly he's just kind of a non-factor. He's potentially going to be a factor against Tampa Bay Buccaneers on Monday night with A.J. Brown out. But if he's looking for another opportunity, which I can't imagine he's happy being buried on that depth chart in Philadelphia, so I imagine he's going to want to go elsewhere and try to find a job somewhere else. He's got the potential need for a change of scenery, and then he's also got that deep speed that I think every NFL team kind of covets. And if you've got a wide receiver coach and offensive coordinator that really thinks they can kind of make it work with him, where the Philadelphia Eagles weren't able to, then you might take the chance on him. He's not going to be super expensive, so you add him in there. You let him come in to be, maybe your 4th receiver, depending on what they do. If it's Terry, Jahan, and De'Ami Brown, then you have him come in for that challenge for that 3rd or 4th spot. And he's much happier probably doing that than settling for like the 5th spot in Philadelphia. And for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, this is a guy that if we get wind that he is going to hit the open market, I feel like he's going to be a name we're going to talk a lot about this offseason. Tampa Bay Buccaneers, a linebacker, Devin White, number 5 overall pick the year he came out in the NFL draft. One of the key components to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers Super Bowl run. Like I know everybody talks about Tom Brady, but if you really go back to that playoff run, the defense really stood up, especially against Kansas City Chiefs, holding Patrick Mahomes and that offense to 9 points. Never going to be easy. Devin White was a massive, massive part of that. But there's some drawbacks. He's not viewed as a great locker room guy. He's kind of been known to loaf on certain plays. He's been known to voice his complaints when he's not playing really good footballer. The team's not doing really well, but his athletic upside is off the charts. He's one of the best linebackers in the NFL when he's playing at peak performance. You might have to overpay a little bit up front because there are going to be people who want to overpay for that athleticism. But if the contract is built right, and what I mean by that is easy to escape if his personality outweighs his play, which we've seen before, just don't make him the face of the franchise, man. I kind of look at it at what the 49ers did with Chase Young. Like Chase Young, in Washington, he's a franchise leader, whether you want him to be or not. And, his personality kind of conflicted with what was going on in the locker room and what was going on with the coaching staff. And, he was criticized for taking plays off, for not doing what he was told to do, playing within the scheme, things like that. He goes to San Francisco. He's no longer the star. Now, certainly people know who Chase Young is, right? But he's a star among other stars. You bring Devin White here, just don't put him on the posters, man. Just don't put him, in the commercials. Like just tell him to come here, be a linebacker, keep his head down, keep his nose clean, and go out there and do his job. Probably a 1-year prove it deal, or maybe like a 2 or 3 year deal that's really heavy in the guarantees up front, so that again, if you need to move on from him quickly, you can. If you get a 1-year deal and he does well and he gets paid somewhere else, maybe you get a 2026 comp pick. The thing about Devin, and I've been covering his career with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers since he got in the NFL. I remember talking to him at the combine when he was coming out of college. Really liked the dude, you know what I mean? Like really liked Devin. Would enjoy kicking out in my backyard, having a barbecue or something like that. Like, but he's definitely rubbed some people wrong in that Buccaneers locker room in a way that you don't want to have happen in Washington. But that talent is really, really hard to deny. So again, if this staff is strong enough and if they feel like they can get what they need out of him and give him an opportunity to maybe come in, not be, that franchise face and all that stuff, just be a dude who goes to work every day, certainly is someone that we're going to talk about if we get wind that the Buccaneers are not going to be bringing him back after this season. So that's our wildcard free agency preview. We got our first real deep free agent preview of the year. We've got plenty more free agent conversation to come up throughout the season. But come back tomorrow. We'll talk about whatever breaking news is coming out. We'll get back up to date on our coaching interview watch. We'll update the list from last week, and we'll take an updated list of what's going on in the NFL playoffs, where we hope to be covering Washington Commanders football this time next year. In the meantime, you got questions or comments, throw them down in the YouTube comment section or text me directly by becoming a Lock Insider at joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders. As always, thank you for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day every day. Every day, thanks for coming through on a regular basis like you do. Thank you so much for making me a part of your day, part of your routine. Until we speak again, please, if you're out and about, be safe, be kind. See you next time for another episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.